Welcome back to part two of What About Nutrition today. Another great weekend, and great to have you folks along with us. I'm Steve Casper from Westplex Radio, and alongside David Gall, Mr. Nutrition of O'Fallon Nutrition. And you can find him on the web at o'fallonnutrition.com, talking about cravings and moods and all kinds of things going on. So where did we leave off?
Well, so we left off, I was saying that we would come back and summarize, some of the fats that we want to eat less of and some that we want to try to eat more of to achieve some of this omega-3 and 6 balance in our diet. And then we'll talk a little bit about some of the supplements that are available, and then also some of the supplements that help people's bodies utilize fat if they have difficulty processing them. And just a brief review is, so we're talking about balance between omega-3 and 6 in a diet. And why is that important? Well, first of all, today's focus is on fat cravings, and folks will typically start to crave more fat or creamy foods or fried foods if they are deficient in essential fatty acids such as omega-3 fats. Often people sometimes refer to omega-3 fats as the other vitamin, or vitamin F2, or vitamin F for fat, because they are required for life, just like the vitamins are. Without essential fatty acids, we would die. And many people are making do with barely enough to maintain life, and that, of course, impacts brain health and all sorts of other things. So we want a balance between omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids in order to A, balance out inflammation in the body. Omega fatty acids, whether they're 6 or 3, are used to make prostaglandins, which are cellular hormones, and some of those prostaglandins are pro-inflammatory. They increase inflammation. Some of them reduce inflammation. Some will do things like raise blood pressure. Others will lower it. And long story short, the omega-6 fatty acids, which people tend to get too much of, increase inflammation and can add to things like blood pressure and other issues, whereas the omega-3 fats decrease inflammation, can help lower blood pressure, can actually help act as diuretics. This is something we haven't talked about before, but getting essential fatty acids can help you with water bloat. And the reason is because they're incorporated into our cell membranes, and if we don't get very many of them, the cell membranes, which is like the skin of our cell, and that's supposed to let things like potassium into the cell and things like salt out of the cell, well, that membrane, that skin, becomes very hard if we eat too many of the harder fats, the omega-6 fats or the partially hydrogenated saturated fats. Those omega-3s are much more liquid. And so if we consume omega-3s and they end up making up our cell membranes, the skin of our cells, and they're more liquid, then the cell is more permeable. It can allow potassium in, it can get sodium out. There's all sorts of other nutrients that are supposed to come into the cell that get into there easier, and the cells can actually communicate with each other easier, which of course plays a huge role in brain health. And then I would be remiss if I didn't mention that these essential fatty acids are required to feed our endocrine glands, like our adrenals, testes, ovaries, etc. We need them to make things like testosterone and adrenaline. I could go on and on. You need it for moist, nice, soft skin. Taking essential fatty acids for the skin alone is a great reason. So, a lot of people, we've talked about this before in our cooking oils show.
Yeah, that was a great show.
Yep, I like that one. And we talked, a lot of people use these high omega-6 fats for cooking. Canola oil, vegetable oil, soybean oil. We also get those oils in our salad dressings in huge amounts. Those are probably the two biggest sources of them, actually. And long story short, not to overuse that phrase today, I should say, what about nutrition here? So when we have these oils.
Yeah.
Well, these oils have been bleached and deodorized, and that's why they're clear, odorless, and tasteless. They lack the naturally occurring vitamin E that would have been in them. And more importantly, they're actually inflammatory, and often they're rancid in the bottle. But because they've been deodorized and gone through this processing, we can't smell or taste the rancidity.
Okay.
And that would be oxidized fat, which increases oxidation in our bodies, which is aging. So, balance of omega-3 and 6. We want to bring more of these omega-3 fats in that reduce inflammation, and we want to bring less of these omega-6 fats in that increase it, among other negative things. So if we use oils like extra virgin coconut oil or olive oil or macadamia nut oil for cooking, those are all oils that are low in these omega-6 fats. That's why they're also great in our salad dressings, because they don't add to this burden of too much omega-6 versus too little omega-3 in our diet. Our human ancestors, or if you go back to times like biblical times, people would have eaten roughly about 2 parts omega-3 2 parts omega-6 to about 1 part omega-3 in earlier diets of humans, regardless of the part of the world you're in. And that's because those are the natural ratios present in food that has not been processed or gone through a lot of industrialized, techniques. So standard human diet should be about 2 parts omega-6 to 1 part omega-3. Studies show that the average American's diet is something like 20 parts omega-6 to 1 part omega-3.
That's why it's important to take as many, really,
omega-3s.
as many as you can.
Yeah, and the other key is to reduce your consumption of omega-6s. So I guess I'm doing all this talking to kind of make that point. We actually want to eat less omega-6s, more omega-3s. A great way we can reduce our omega-6 intake is to cook with oils that don't have tons of omega-6 and dress our salads with oils that have less omega-6, something like olive oil. And finally, meat is a source of omega-6 inflammatory fats too. And of course, if we do grass-fed beef or if we eat fish in place of meat, that will give us more omega-3 and
chicken?
less 6.
What about chicken?
Chicken still has more omega-6 and less omega-3.
But where is it on the scale between fish and beef?
It's in between them, but it's closer to beef than it is to fish.
Really?
Now, if you eat a wild chicken that's eaten like seeds and grubs and things like that, you can assume that it's going to have a better ratio of omega-6
What about
to
turkey?
3.
What about turkey?
Turkey will be about the same as chicken,
No
higher
kidding.
in 6 and lower in 3.
Well, it's interesting because we're not talking about calories. We're talking about omega-6s.
Right.
Compared to omega-3s.
Yeah, and so it's kind of confusing because they're both essential fats, but really we eat probably too many omega-6s and not enough omega-3s.
And you think in our industrial world, let's just look at America,
Yes.
you're looking about 20 to 1, did you say?
About 20 to 1.
Oh, my God.
I mean, if you look at most of your processed food or foods that you can eat in fast food restaurants or things like that, the majority of the fat's omega-6 and very little omega-3. And that's because omega-3 is really susceptible to oxidation. It goes bad fast.
Yeah, it does.
So they don't use it a lot in food that has to be shelf stable or work in a fast food restaurant. It doesn't tolerate heat well, so you can't really cook with omega-3. If you want a really easy way to raise your omega-3 intake and fix this overall ratio in your diet, flaxseed oil is wonderful. It has the highest ratio of omega-3 to omega-6 of anything that isn't fish oil, basically. And flaxseed oil is great in smoothies. You can use it for salad dressings, things like that. But I'd also encourage people to use olive oil, extra virgin coconut oil, macadamia nut oil for different cooking or eating purposes like salad dressings, because those don't add to your omega-6 burden, but they have great cooking characteristics like tolerating heat and things like that, particularly the extra virgin coconut oil and macadamia nut oil. So in terms of supplements, we want to, especially if we're craving fat, craving creamy foods, craving cheese, craving fried foods, typically we want to supplement with essential fatty acids. And so what we're referring here to is you can use something like flax oil to give yourself a really large amount of basic, cheap omega-3 fat and get that overall ratio in your diet closer to 2 parts omega-6 to 1 part omega-3.
Yeah, absolutely.
Every tablespoon of flax oil has 6 or 7 grams of omega-3, so it really makes it quick and easy to balance it. And then some fish oil in addition to that to provide that preformed EPA and DHA in case we, like some of our ancestors that lived in areas around a lot of fish near bodies of water, in case we can't convert all of that basic omega-3 to the special omega-3s, EPA and DHA. And DHA is the structural fat that's in our brain. It makes up big parts of our neurons, our brain cells, as well as the insulation around our nerves like the myelin. And EPA, this other omega-3 found in fish, that one's a lot more heavily involved in the processes that happen day to day, the little chemical processes. So it helps a lot in studies to regulate mood. There's a lot of studies on attention deficit disorder and EPA, a lot of studies on depression and EPA. But if somebody has never supplemented with omega-3s, they also need DHA, the second one in fish oil, because it's the structure. So you've got to actually form new brain cells that have had the benefit of incorporating DHA into their structure. Yeah. And it gets to reasons like that permeability of the membrane around the cell so that they can communicate with other cells and basically function the way that they are intended to function.
Someone who's gone through depression, and we talked about this before, really needs to take a lot of omega-3s too, because it's all part of that solution to their problem.
Right. A lot of studies show big benefits for depression with omega-3s. A lot of them use the equivalent of 6 grams of fish oil per day. Now, you can make that easier in stores like O'Fallon Nutrition. We have concentrated sources of fish oil, and we even have products that either concentrate heavy amounts of EPA,
Yes.
or heavy amounts of DHA, or heavy amounts of both, depending on what application you've got. Lots of good brands. One of them is Manami, the new brand by Garden of Life, that based on European pharmaceutical level fish oil, and they have all these different variations. And then I mentioned at the end of part 1 that I would talk about things to help us with absorbing and digesting fat. So a lot of folks have issues with that. You'll see issues like oily skin, indigestion when they eat fat, fish burps if they take fish oil. And so I just want to point out that there's an enzyme called lipase that breaks down fat. Many people become deficient in it or have other issues with producing it. And we have a brand of fish oil named Renew Life in O'Fallon Nutrition that incorporates lipase right into the fish oil, can help prevent fish burps and make you utilize those fats better. Or some of our mixed digestive enzymes that we use with people with general digestive discomfort, indigestion, heartburn, gas. Those enzymes all include lipase to help break down fats as well. And then I also need to mention that we carry this herb known as milk thistle. And milk thistle in studies improves flow of bile from the gallbladder, and bile helps to emulsify fat so we can absorb it. Lots of people have had issues with their gallbladders. If you have, you know who you are. And I would suggest looking into the herb milk thistle for gallbladder or liver issues. In studies, it does increase the rate at which new liver cells are formed. Other studies have looked at it in regards to hepatitis and had real positive effects. So I need to mention that milk thistle is really, really useful if there's liver or gallbladder issues going on, and that'll impact your ability to digest fat. And finally, a good old lecithin. Lecithin helps to emulsify fat, and if somebody's had their gallbladder removed, then they may not be releasing bile. Bile emulsifies fat so we can digest and absorb it. Lecithin might be something that they could consider using in order to go after that. So we want to make sure that we get sufficient essential fatty acids, particularly if we've got mood issues, particularly if we crave fat. And remember that you want about 2 parts omega-6 to 1 part omega-3 in your diet. So you want to use a little bit less of the omega-6 oils, which are easy to come by. They're in meat, things like the clear oils that we cook with, like vegetable oil, and we want to consume more omega-3s from sources like flax oil, green leafy vegetables, nuts like walnuts. Your other nuts are actually too higher in omega-6, and we might want to consider using supplements of omega-3.
All right, what a great show. And all this tends to kind of overlap with other shows we've done, and that's good because we'll be talking more about omega-3s, I'm sure, in omega-6 versus omega-6 in our diet later. Thanks a lot, David. Have a great weekend, everybody. Join us next time, same place, same point on your Android or on your iPhone or online or on radio. We'll be right here. As we are What About Nutrition? David Gall, O'Fallon Nutrition. It's www.o'fallonnutrition.com. And, of course, Steve Casper at Westplex Radio. Thanks, Dave. We'll see you next week.
Thanks a lot, Steve. Have a great week, everyone.
See you, everybody.